What's up everybody, it's Man of Low Moral Fiber here. My name's Luke, and in this video we're going to be making a sniper rifle parts guide for Borderlands 2. I've recently been doing some sniper farming, and people have asked me to make a guide detailing the different parts so that people know how they affect the guns, and how they'll be able to tell them apart. In order to make a sniper rifle parts guide, it's going to have to get pretty in-depth, and I figured it would be best for us to start at the beginning. So I have this white sniper rifle here. You can see that it is a Cole Muckamuck. Now, every sniper rifle is made up of a number of different components, including the level of the weapon. This one is overpower level 8 or level 80, which all of the weapons will be in this video, except for one. And the rarity of this weapon is white rarity, so we know that this is the most basic rarity in the game. The other components that a sniper rifle are made up of include the body of the weapon, the grip, the stock, the barrel, the sight, and potentially the accessory and the element. However, this being a normal Jacobs weapon, it does not have an element, and being a white rarity weapon, it does not have an accessory. Accessories actually do not spawn on white weaponry. So, this is the most basic sniper rifle that we'll be covering. There are a number of different varieties of white sniper rifles that can occur, including one for every company at the very least, but multiple for every company, I do believe. Regardless, no one really uses white rarity sniper rifles, so we won't spend too much time on it. However, we can go ahead and look and see that all of these are Jacobs parts. This is a Jacobs body, a Jacobs grip, a Jacobs stock, a Jacobs scope, and a Jacobs barrel. Now, if we move to a green rarity sniper with all the same parts, we can see that they look pretty similar here. Taking a look at this one, it still has that same shaped stock, still has the same grip with the screws that hold in the, grippy piece there. And we can also see it's got the same barrel. The body is a little bit different because the body changes when you move in rarities. And it has the same scope here, but there's an addition to it. And the addition is what changes the name on this weapon. This one is called Skookum, and that is the prefix for the base damage accessory on Jacobs rifles. And so the base damage accessory on all brands of rifles will look like this, but it will end up giving it a different name. For example, on a Vladof rifle, it's going to be Gromke. We can get to that a little bit later. Now, comparing the two weapons, we can see that that's not what I wanted. We can see that the stats are just all across the board significantly better for the green rarity sniper. It has a much improved fire rate because the white sniper is actually bolt action, whereas the green sniper is going to be semi-automatic. So bolt action means you have to wait for 0 to actuate that bolt action every single time. Whereas on the green rarity, it's semi-automatic, so all you really have to do is wait for the cylinder to spin. So those are the two most basic rarities of sniper rifles, and it's important to note that the accessory is always going to override the grip name. Now, the different grips can change the name of a weapon if you do not have an accessory. On the accessory version of this weapon, we can see that it is still called a Skookum in the blue rarity, but if we take the accessory off, it's going to be called a Cole Muckamuck if it has the Jacobs grip there. Now, comparing the Skookum to the Cole, we can see that the Skookum has all the same stats except a higher base damage. Skookum is the base damage accessory there, or the sight shroud is the base damage accessory. Now, the grip of the weapon can change the stats, and in this case, the name of the weapon as well, because this weapon does not have an accessory here. So if we compare these two, we can see that the Cole Muckamuck is going to have a higher base damage, a slightly lower fire rate, but a bonus magazine size and reload speed. So when you have a grip that matches the manufacturer or body of the weapon, you do get a bonus for sniper rifles in reload speed and magazine size, which is one reason why having the matching grip is usually preferable. There are situations where it's not preferable. We'll probably get to that later. Probably in another video, actually, when we review specific weapons and their parts. This is kind of an overview for basic weapons. Moving up to the purple rarity, we can see that the stats are going to get even better. Now, if we do compare real quick the green rarity over to the blue rarity, we can see that the blue rarity has a significantly higher base damage. However, the fire rate is lower. Before we mess around with the purple one, let's compare the fire rates of the white, the green, and the blue. So the white one and the blue one are going to have the same fire rate of 0.5, and that's because they're both bolt action. The green rarity one, though, is going to have a much higher fire rate because it's semi-automatic. Now, when we go to the purple one, we are once again back to semi-automatic weaponry, and the fire rate is the same between the green and the purple. The purple rarity actually has a lower base damage than the blue rarity. This isn't the case for all sniper rifles, but it is the case for Jacobs, and it's a little interesting quirk. However, the purple rarity is significantly easier to use because of the higher fire rate. Curiously, it also gets a higher accuracy, which semi-automatics aren't really known for over bolt action. Regardless, that's how it works in this game. So, that's all we know now, or all we need to know about white through purple rarities on the Jacobs weapons, and we can begin to look at how the different parts, when we go to different manufacturers, for the grip, the stock, the sight, and potentially the barrel as well, are going to change the weapon's stats, and its name in some cases. So let's take a look at this weapon here. This weapon has the same exact stats as the one I'm already holding, but it has a different stock and a different sight. Let's pick that one up, and we'll take a look at it here. So I'll go ahead and unequip the ones we're not looking at for the moment, and then we'll equip this one here. So the Jacobs one, the all Jacobs one, assuming the game will let me do it here, is going to be in slot 1. So when we look at the two different cards, they're exactly the same except for the weapon zoom. And so that's because they have different sights on them. This Jacobs sight is a little bit narrower, a little bit longer, I think. Maybe they're the same length, but you can see that the Dahl one definitely is wider. And so if we're using the two weapons, you can actually tell it as well. So this is the Dahl one here. It's got the very reflective rear eyepiece. And the Jacobs one is a smaller rear eyepiece, and it reflects a smaller area. If we zoom in, you can see that the Jacobs one is definitely zoomed in further than the Dahl one. So if we put our cursor here on the middle X, you can see that the edges of the scope actually contain these stairs way down here in front of us. Switching back to the Jacobs one, they actually don't contain the bottom of those stairs way below us. So that is the difference in the scopes in this game, is the aesthetic nature of them, but also how far they zoom in, their magnification level. Now the stock level is going to, the stock is going to affect the sway of the weapon and also recoil recovery. So if we're using the Jacobs one here, you can see that it holds pretty still. There's a little bit of sway to it, as there are with all sniper rifles, but it doesn't move too much. If we switch over to the Dahl one, you can see that it moves just ever so slightly more than the Jacobs one. Not a huge deal there, but it does move a little bit. If we're shooting the Dahl one, you can see that it recovers recoil about that fast. If we're shooting the Jacobs one, it recovers a little bit differently. Seems to jump a little bit higher on the first shot, bounce around a little bit more. So that's how the different stocks can affect you. Now, on stocks and scopes, I will say that it basically comes down to personal preference and how you're able to control the recoil. If you've ever seen the pros play CSGO, and the weapons have different spread patterns, and the pros know what those are, and they're able to adjust for them, and so as they're shooting, they move their mouse down, and the weapon still holds, where they're trying to actually aim. So that's kind of how it works in Borderlands 2 as well. I'd recommend just finding out which stock you prefer, and then figuring out how best to control it. For me, I will say that the Dahl stock has been my favorite for semi-automatic weapons like the Pimpernel. I guess the Pimpernel is full auto, but I kind of treat it like a semi-auto. But like the Pimpernel and most Jacobs weapons, so I usually like the Dahl stock on these. However, this is what the Jacobs stock looks like. It's all wood. The Dahl stock seems to have a folding pivot point right here. Pretty tactical, if you will. So the weapon stats on the card, other than the zoom magnification, did not change when we changed the stock and the sight. However, they will change when we begin to change the grip. So I'm going to get rid of the Dahl version here for just a minute, and we'll pick up some of these other ones. We can see that this here is going to be a Hyperion grip, and you can tell the Hyperion grip because it has a slanting downward piece here, and it's got this weird trigger guard that covers both your trigger finger and the lower fingers as well. And so in comparison to the Jacob's grip, we'll see that it has a lower base damage. It's also got a slightly higher fire rate, but it does not have the reload speed bonus or the magazine size bonus that we get with the Jacob's grip. Moving on now to the Dahl grip, we can see that it too has the same fire rate that the Hyperion one had, but the base damage is a little bit higher on the Dahl. The accuracy is a little bit higher on the Hyperion. The Jacob's grip still seems to be the better grip here to me, because you get that higher base damage and you also get that reload speed and magazine size bonus as well. The Dahl grip can be seen by this, relatively normal looking finger cutout here, and it's got a normal trigger guard as well. It also has a pretty cool cutout here on the back of it. You can be able to tell it a little bit by that. This is the Maliwan grip here. One thing that's interesting about the Maliwan grip is it has no trigger guard, which is ridiculously dangerous. Weapons shouldn't have that. I don't know if that was an omission by the artwork team or what was going on there. The Maliwan grip kind of looks similar to the Jacob's grip in some ways, but the Jacob's grip does have a trigger guard, and the molding for the Jacob's grip is held in by screws, whereas on the Maliwan grip, it is not. So that is how I've decided to tell the Maliwan grips and the Jacob's grips apart, is with the screws, and the presence of a trigger guard will indicate that it's Jacob's. So we will now pick up this last grip here, and we'll take a look at it as well. This one, whichever one we actually, is the Vladof grip. So the Vladof grip has a downward slanting finger groove, which I can't imagine would be too useful for most people. Probably looks uncomfortable. And obviously the Vladof grip is going to give us the best boost in fire rate. In comparison to the Jacob's one though, the base damage is quite a bit lower. However, it does gain 0.5 more fire rate. Obviously it has a higher reload speed and a lower magazine size as well. So that's the difference in the grips of the weapon. They actually changed the stats on the weapon. So far, we've only really been looking at Jacob's barrels, and so now we're going to begin looking at some other barrels as well. Hopefully these guns don't fly too far everywhere. Okay, good. So now we'll come over here and we'll look at some of these guns. So these are all going to have different barrels. Looks like I put another muck-a-muck over there, so I'll drop this muck-a-muck. We'll pick up that muck-a-muck there, and then we'll pick up a few of these. So again, here's our baseline muck-a-muck. This is all Jacob's. Jacob's stock, Jacob's grip, Jacob's sight, Jacob's barrel. And this is going to be all Dahl. So this Dahl stock, again, has that, if I shrink it down here, has that piece where it looks like the stock is collapsible. It has the bigger scope that doesn't zoom as far. And it has this grip here with the cutout and the normal looking finger groove. Kind of a blocky butt end of the grip as well there. The Dahl barrel has this cool barrel cover. And it kind of looks like that this barrel is almost blockish, It definitely looks squarer than the other barrels. And so in comparing the stats, we can see that the Calipine, and it does get a different name because it's got a different barrel, has a much lower base damage, and it's really not as good of a weapon as the Muck-a-Muck. It does fire a little bit faster, but not enough to make up for that severe decrease in base damage. Let's move on down now to the Daub, which is going to be the one with the Vladof barrel. So this one also has a Vladof sight, and the Vladof sight looks a little bit different. It's going to have, again, this barrel shroud up here, but also it always has its own little, I don't know what you would call this, shade cover up here, and that's one way that you can tell the Vladof scope. The Vladof scope also has this very bulbous back end. The Vladof stock is always going to be made up of these two thin metal pipes or metal bars, and so it doesn't look like, a lot of other stocks. It's pretty unique, and you can tell it apart from the Dahl stock and the Jacob's stock. So the Daub actually has a higher damage, I believe, than the Calipine. So the Calipine, it's just a worse version of the Daub all the way around. The Daub's significantly better than the Calipine. However, compared to the Muck-a-Muck, the Daub does seem to lack a little bit of damage. We're going to move on now to the Maliwan build out of this weapon. And we can see that the Maliwan grip, again, has that molded grip accessory there. There's nothing holding it in. It's just kind of adhered to it. Now, the Maliwan stock does look pretty unique. It's always going to have highlights that kind of match the coloring of the body of the weapon. And it looks a little bit different on Maliwan weapons as well. Anywho, the very angular shape of the Maliwan stock and the Maliwan barrel are how I'm able to identify Maliwan parts ordinarily. Now, the Maliwan sight is still going to have this highlighting kind of similar to the stock here. So this is gold on a Maliwan weapon with an element. This usually matches the element of the weapon. It's gold on Jacobs, though. Alright, so let's drop the Maliwan just for a second so that we can pick up this last variety here. And this one is called a Chinook. So the Chinook, oops, if I actually look at it here, has a Hyperion build out to it. So this is the Hyperion grip. And you can see that the Hyperion grip has a weird trigger guard that guards your lower fingers as well. So it's got a trigger guard for your upper finger, and it has space for your lower fingers to kind of have like a trigger guard. The grip is also very angular, much like the stock. So the Hyperion stock here, it has this weird rubber padding on the back of it. That's one way you'll be able to see that it's different than the other stocks, which don't usually seem to have that. I guess this one does. The Dahl stock does. The Vladof stock seems to actually have some rubber on it as well. So, I don't know. You'll have to memorize the angles of the Hyperion stock, I would say. Now, the Hyperion barrel has this weird vented cover, and that's one way you'll be able to tell that Hyperion barrel. Also, the Hyperion barrel doesn't seem to be round. It seems to be like almost hexagonal. I'm not sure if the other barrels are like that as well. No, the Jacobs barrel definitely seems to be rounder, whereas the Hyperion barrel has angles to it. So, interesting. Now, the Hyperion sight is definitely the sight I like the least because I think it zooms in too far. You guys might like it, but man, it zooms in really, really far. If we aim at that X there, you can see that we can't see any of the bottom stairs. Whereas with the Dahl scope, we can see some of them, right? Switching back to the Hyperion scope here, none of them. So, much higher zoom there on the Hyperion scope. You can see the sway on some of these stocks is a little bit different as well. And again, stock preference I really think is going to have varying mileage per user. I'd recommend just testing the different stocks and trying to figure out which ones you like best for which applications. Now let's take a look at some sniper rifles that have different accessories. So I should have an accessory pile over here. So I'm going to drop some of these weapons. Probably have another Skookle-Muckamuck over here if I had to guess. Yes, I do. So we'll pick that one up as our baseline, and then we'll look at some of other ones here. So again, Skookle is going to be the base damage prefix, so it will have a higher damage than all of these other ones. Back to all Jacobs parts on these, because the only part that we're not controlling for here is going to be the accessory. So this is the base damage accessory. We understand that because it has a higher base damage than these other weapons. Now on this one, we can tell right away that is the melee accessory. It's called a Tecopi, I guess, for Jacobs. I believe the Jacobs prefixes are named after American Indian tribes. Regardless, we're moving on now. This is the Tum Tum version of the weapon. Now, the Tum Tum version of the weapon is going to be the one with additional critical hit damage. So it says plus 180 critical hit damage there, and this one doesn't say plus any critical hit damage. And so some people think that this is going to be a huge improvement over this, but this one does have a huge critical hit damage that isn't listed on the card. So I'd recommend actually comparing the Tum Tum to the Skookle, and we'll try to do that a little bit later. Anywho, the critical hit damage accessory is going to have the round leg bipod. And it's weird because there's actually another weapon with a bipod, or another weapon accessory that has a bipod, and it does accuracy, I believe, but its bipod looks different. So the rounded bipod is going to be the one for critical hit damage. This is going to be the stability version. It has a foregrip. So that one, presumably, I guess it's this one. Zero doesn't hold it by its foregrip, but this is the one we're looking at. Theoretically, it shouldn't bounce as much when we shoot it, so that's kind of cool there because Jacob's weapons usually have quite a bit of recoil. I'm probably still going to go with base damage and try to control for it, but, you know, pretty cool that there is an accessory that does that, so that's what that accessory does. If we look at this one here, Hyu, this one is actually going to be magazine size, and we can compare it here to the Skookum version or any of these other ones, and you can see that it has 2 more in the mag, so kind of cool there. We'll drop this weapon, and this one as well, and we'll look at these last 2 here. So this is the other bipod I was talking about, and this bipod has more angular or thinner bipod legs. And so this one's going to have a slightly higher accuracy from, 97.4 to 97.7. So this particular accessory is usually not very good. There is one sniper that it's decent on, but it's kind of outdone by a lot of Zero's skills as well, like precision and at one with the gun. So because of that, that's not a super good accessory and one you probably want to avoid on most of your snipers. Anywho, this is going to be the Kluk Mukmuk. And so this one is going to be fire rate, I believe. And so if we compare that, we can see that it does have a significantly higher fire rate than the base damage version. And so that's, sometimes you'll have to make that decision whether you want to shoot a lot faster or if you want your shots to do a little bit more damage every time. So that's kind of the way that works there. We'll get rid of these other weapons, maybe not our baseline model. No, we can even go ahead and drop that one as well. Now let's look at some other brands of weapons here. We can see that these are a bunch of different Maliwan weapons. So this is going to be the Maliwan weapon with the Jacob's barrel. And it does look different because, it's on a Maliwan weapon and it's going to get a Maliwan skin. So even being a Jacob's barrel, it's going to have an element when it's a Maliwan weapon. And the Jacob's barrel can have elements in different brands as well. So, being a Maliwan weapon, I had to give this one an element, and it is fire. You can see how the scope has a fire highlight here, whereas the stock is going to have highlights that match the body. Now, this is a Maliwan grip on this, and a Maliwan stock, and a Maliwan scope, and it's called the Corinthian. This is going to be a Snider, and the Snider can actually be 2 different barrels. The name is dependent on the barrel. Again, all Maliwan parts on the back end of the gun here. And you can see that with this Maliwan barrel, it's got a pretty high damage there. So, this is going to be the Raquel. This is the Vladof barrel. You can see that it has a pretty high fire rate of 1.9, higher than the 1.5 that this one has. Not a huge difference in base damage, but it is there. And the Raquel does get a better magazine size as well. Looking now at the Jericho, we can see that the Jericho has the lowest base damage of all these Maliwan variants because of its Hyperion barrel. The Jericho also has a pretty low fire rate, and the magazine size isn't that great, so you probably don't want a Hyperion barreled Maliwan sniper. We'll go ahead and drop that one and look at this other Snider here. So this is going to be a Dahl barrel on this Snider. And so I actually really like the Maliwan Snider, but I really want the one with the Maliwan barrel there as opposed to the one with the Dahl barrel. If we compare the 2 cards, you can see that the Maliwan barrel is better all the way across the board. There's nothing that the Dahl barrel has over the Maliwan barrel, even though they share the same name. So you're definitely going to want a Maliwan barrel if you're looking for a non-unique Maliwan sniper there. If you're going for base damage, at least. The fire rate Raquel is actually a pretty cool weapon as well, though. So that's a trade that you might have to debate between. The Raquel has its advantages over the Snider, a significantly higher fire rate being one of those advantages, and also the deeper magazine size. Regardless, we can see that the Maliwan barrel does have the highest ignite chance, because that's one of Maliwan's things, is elemental chance. So that's kind of how the different barrels work on the Maliwan. These all have the base damage accessory, but instead of it being called Skookum, you can see that it's called Barking on a Maliwan weapon. Base damage is ordinarily the best accessory for these sniper rifles, but sometimes fire rate can be a great accessory as well. I actually run my Pimpernels with the fire rate accessory most of the time, which is called Banberry on Maliwan. So we'll drop the Maliwan weapons now, and we'll move on to some of these other ones. I feel like there should be some snipers over here, but I just can't see them. The joke here is that these are Dahl, and all of the Dahl snipers are going to have camouflage. Being different rarities, they'll have different camouflages. It looks like the purple rarity has a... I don't know what environment this would be for. In case you're fighting in a volcano, we have the volcano-covered camo here, so that's pretty cool. With a Hyperion barrel, this one's going to be called a strike. Again, Hyperion is going to have the lowest base damage of all of those different barrels. Because of that, I'm just going to get rid of the Hyperion version, and we'll look at this other barrel here. Now, you would expect the Dahl barrel on the Dahl sniper to probably be the best version, but I'm not so sure about that. The Dahl version here is going to have a significantly lower damage than the Terror, which is going to be the Jacob's barrel. And you can see that they have the same mag size, and the reload speed's the same. The main difference is the fire rate there. And if we take a look at how the Dahl one is going to fire here, oops, if I had ammo, that was a calculated error on my part. Probably gonna need to get ammo. Well, while I go buy ammo, we'll look at some of these different numbers. You can see that the fire rate on the Vladof barrel Dahl is very, very high. Whereas on the Dahl barrel Dahl, it's a little bit lower. The Maliwan barrel and the Dahl barrel have the same exact fire rate. We'll compare those in just a second. Alright, so now that we actually have some ammo, let's take a look at how quickly the Dahl one fires. Obviously, being a Dahl weapon, it has burst fire, and you can see that it fires pretty quick there. It also has a large burst size, from 17 down to 11. So that's 6 bullets coming out of this guy pretty damn quickly there. And now let's take a look at the... what do they call this? They call it a Scout. So this is the Vladof barreled version. You can see that it fires a lot quicker, but the burst is a lot smaller. So when you have the Dahl parts here on this Dahl weapon, the burst size is huge, which is pretty crazy. So that's kind of the difference in some of the Dahl snipers there. Now the Jacobs one, let's see how quickly it shoots. You can see that it shoots a lot slower, and it's got a burst size of 4. So that's kind of why the Dahl barrel reigns supreme on the Dahl snipers, I believe, if you're looking for that burst fire mechanic. It simply has the most accurate burst. The burst goes fast. Not the fastest, like I think at least the Scout says it should burst faster, but because the burst size is bigger, I think the Dahl one actually outdoes Vladof in fire rate. The Dahl one's pretty cool. Anywho, that's how the Dahl snipers work. And now we'll look at some of the Hyperion snipers. So the Hyperion sniper with the Hyperion barrel is called a transaction. And you can see it does under 1,000,000 damage there, but it's beating out some of these other ones, or at least it's close to them. Yeah, so on the Hyperion body sniper, the Hyperion barrel is actually not laughably below the rest of their damage. You can see that it is the most accurate. I guess that's Hyperion's gimmick there. These all have the Hyperion grip, but the Vladof barreled one is going to have a higher magazine size and a higher fire rate. It also seems to have almost the same damage, so perhaps if you want to use a Hyperion sniper, the Vladof barrel might still be better than the Hyperion barrel. Now, Hyperion snipers did get a huge boost as a part of the community patch, which I haven't tested yet, but you can see that the Vladof barrel, if I can find it again here, fires a lot faster than the Hyperion barrel. So that's kind of how those work for the most part. These are all Hyperion parts. You can see that they are all going to have that scope that zooms in super far. They're going to have that super angular stock as well. They're pretty cool. They look really cool at least. And it'll be interesting to see how their buff is in the community patch. Now let's take a look at that Jacobs barreled one. And I'll drop, I guess, this one in order to pick up the Jacobs barrel. You can see that the Jacobs barrel on the Hyperion is going to be called a policy instead of a transaction like it is with the Hyperion barrel. They also have some other names, including the Bland Sniper Rifle and Competition. Some of the different barrels and body combinations share names, much like Sniper Rifle and Snider. Regardless, we're taking a look at this one here. We can see that it has a pretty high base damage, and it also has the same magazine size as the Hyperion barreled one. The only thing it's lacking is a very minute amount of accuracy and a pretty low amount of fire rate, to be honest. So you'll probably want the Jacobs barrel if you're using a Hyperion sniper, maybe. Not the Hyperion barrel, I would imagine. It seems like in base damage capabilities, it's definitely outdone by the Jacobs, and in fire rate, it's, outdone pretty well by the Vladof one. So the Hyperion snipers have always been kind of weird, and perhaps we'll do some more testing with those later. We'll go ahead and get rid of all of the Hyperion snipers now, and we'll look at these Vladof snipers. So Vladof snipers can be a little bit different. The Vladof version, or the Vladof barrel, is going to be called the Droog. The purple rarities are going to have this cool silver skin, and all of these are going to have the Vladof grip, the Vladof stock, and the Vladof sight. So you can see that the fire rate on the Droog here is pretty absurd. It shoots very, very, very fast. We're out of ammo again. I should have put on a stockpile relic. We can compare that fire rate, and we can see that it's significantly higher than any other barrel. Now, the Dahl one has a pretty high fire rate, but obviously it has a much lower magazine size. It also has a significantly lower base damage. And on some of these other ones, you can see that the fire rate on the Horror Show doesn't really make up for its slightly higher base damage, because that's a significantly lower fire rate and a much lower magazine size. Moving on to the Maliwan barrel, it's kind of the same thing. It's a little, and the damage is actually lower on the Maliwan one as well. So really on the Vladof one, I think you'd probably only want the Droog. Take a look at this other variant of it here, which is going to be the Hyperion barrel, and see if that barrel is the worst again. Yeah, that's a bad barrel. If we compare it, you can see that it only has a very slightly increased accuracy, but every other stat is lower. So don't use the Hyperion barrel on your non-unique snipers, is what I would say. Now I also have it over here with a magazine size prefix on it at a different level. So this is a level 8 as opposed to overpower level 8 sniper, and you can see that the damage is much, much lower. Still got the same fire rate, but with the magazine prefix, it gets 6 more in the magazine, and everything else remains constant. It seems that the level of the weapon only really changes the damage of the weapon, whereas the accessory can also change the magazine size and some other stuff as well. We'll go ahead and drop those weapons there, and we'll begin looking at a few other weapons. Picking back up a Skokelmuckamuck here. This is with a Dahl scope on it. Perhaps we should pick up one with the Jacobs, just for kicks. Oh, that's the wrong one. We'll have to get rid of that. I don't know where our All Jacobs one went here. There appears to be our All Jacobs one. And we'll also pick up both of these. So, now we have 4 weapons. And you can see... Oh, that's not the All Jacobs one. What am I doing? We'll drop that. Is this the All Jacobs one over here? No, that's Vladof grip. Maliwan grip. Dahl grip. Hyperion grip. We've lost our All Jacobs one. It's over here somewhere, I'd imagine. I don't know if we could ever find it again. It's lost forever. Let's forget about it for now. We can see, though, that in comparing this Skokelmuckamuck to this one, that the Citrine version has higher damage, higher accuracy, and a higher magazine size. That is because in the community patch, they made Citrine, or the Gemstone rarities, one more rarity up from very rare, or purple. And so they get a little bit more damage, they get a little bit more magazine size, and they keep the same fire rate and reload speed. So if you're looking for a non-unique sniper, you'll probably want the Gemstone variant of it. Again, even though these weapons have slightly different parts, for example, this one has a Dahl stock and a Dahl scope, and this one has a Jacobs stock and a Jacobs scope, they have the same exact numbers on the card here. The main difference is the weapon zoom and how they recover from recoil. So again, This one here with the Jacob scope zooms in a little bit further than with the Dahl scope here. So, interesting. And I think we'll notice the same thing even when we move up to legendary weapons. And so the legendary for Jacobs with the Jacobs barrel is going to be called a Skull Masher. And this one's a little bit different because it shoots 6 pellets, kind of like a shotgun. So you can see that the base damage is higher here on the Skull Masher than it is on the Skookum-Muckamuck. Let's pick up one of the citrines. So also notable with the gemstone weapons is that the gemstone prefix is going to override the accessory prefix here. So that's why it's called citrine instead of skookum, even though it has the same accessory. Now comparing the Skull Masher to the Muckamuck, we can see that the Skull Masher has one lower in the mag, I believe because it was based off of the purple instead of being based off of the gemstone. And it also has a lower accuracy, and the damage is different because of this weapon's particular special barrel. Now, when weapons have red text, like this one has, makes your brain hurt, that means they have a unique barrel, which is going to give them special properties. Speaking of unique barrels with special properties, let's go ahead and take a look at the Godfinger. Now, the Godfinger is going to have a Dahl barrel, and so it's a little bit different. You can see that here in the community patch, it's actually based off of the Calipine. They have the same damage numbers, and the magazine size happens to be a little bit different. But they look the same as far as how they're built and stuff. And, you know, the Godfinger has a special effect that it does more damage the further you are away from an enemy. It can get up to a very, very high damage multiplier, and in the non-patched version of the game, it's a little bit hard to use that. In the patched version, they have slowed the projectile down a little bit, and it deals a little bit more damage as it goes out. And so when you're messing around with weapons that have red text, definitely try to figure out what that special effect is doing, because obviously this is a different weapon, even though it appears to be made up of mostly the same parts. It has a different skin, but the actual shape of the weapon is all the same, right? So with the red text, you have to pay a little bit more attention and figure out what that special effect is going to be. There are a couple more red text weapons up here, and they're not legendary rarity or pearlescent rarity. They are actually blue rarity. These are commonly referred to as uniques. So these two weapons, the Trespasser and the Cobra, appear to be built off this Calipine. Again, the Calipine is the Jacobs rifle with the Dahl barrel. So this has a magazine size of 8. These both have a magazine size of 8. Reload speed of 4, right? And so this one has a lower base damage than both the Trespasser and the Cobra. So I actually believe that the Trespasser has a lower base damage perhaps, or a similar base damage in the unpatched version of the game, but in the patched version the Cobra and the Trespasser did get damage boost, and so that's why they actually deal more damage than the standard flavor of the Calipine. You can see that that is the main difference that you see on the card there. The reload speed is the same, the magazine size is the same, the accuracy is negligibly different, and the fire rate seems to be a little bit higher for the Cobra as well. The Cobra also has the highest base damage among this grouping. So that's pretty cool there. And that's kind of how the different unique weapons play off of the base variant they are built off of. If you guys have any questions, let me know. I do plan to continue this sniper part series by looking at what would be the best parts for certain builds of weapons. We can go over here and look at some unskinned variants of these weapons, I believe, just for some kicks and to finish out the video here. So these are weapons that I ripped the skin off of with Gibbs Save Editor. They're all different Jacobs varieties here, but they have the different parts on them, and you might be able to distinguish the parts a little bit more when they don't have a skin attached to them. Again, the Jacobs stock here, the Jacobs grip, the Jacobs scope, and the Jacobs barrel. Ignore the body portion. This is going to be the all Maliwan one with the angular barrel. It's going to have that weird kind of angular scope. If it had a skin on it, we would see the highlight here. This is the angular stock that kind of looks like, I don't know what you would call that, kind of like a salt shaker almost. And so that's what that one looks like. Without the colors on it, we can't really see the molded grip here, but we can see that it does not have a trigger guard, which is very, very strange. That's one way you'll be able to tell the Maliwan grip apart. It's very dangerous. Don't use guns without a trigger guard. This is the all Vladof version, except for the Jacobs body. We can see that it has that Vladof stock here with the pipes on it. The Vladof scope is going to have this bulbous rear end. The Vladof barrel has 2 barrels, and they're rotating, so that's how you'll be able to tell them apart. The Hyperion barrel, again, has this weird overshroud cover. When it has a skin on it, it actually has, little holes in it that would be for venting. It's very angular, and it has a weird downward angle on the grip, and the trigger guard covers your lower fingers as well. Again, the Hyperion scope is very weird. It's got that kind of oval-shaped back end, and it zooms in very, very, very far. So, very far zoom there. I believe the Maliwan one also zooms in quite a bit. Whereas the Jacobs one has a pretty reasonable zoom, and the Dahl one, I believe, has my favorite zoom. And have we picked up the Dahl one yet? Let's switch on in the Dahl one. So the Dahl one here has, the collapsible stock. It has the normal looking finger grooves, and it has this weird kind of floating barrel system that you would see on some large semi-automatic rifles in real life. And the scope has, in my opinion, the most reasonable level of zoom, if I can find that weapon here. The most reasonable level of zoom, and it also has a big, in my opinion, cool looking scope on top of it. If you guys have any questions, please let me know. I know that this video was perhaps a little bit dry, a little bit boring, but I think a lot of people wanted to know what the different parts were. I'll leave a link to a couple different, I don't know what you'd call them, infographics that you'd be able to look at as well. As always, guys, thank you very much for watching. I do appreciate it. If you haven't yet taken the time to subscribe, please do so as well. I'd appreciate that. I am going to be making some optimal parts guides for certain unique and legendary snipers as well. If you guys have any suggestions or things you want to learn more about as far as these parts, let me know. If you really want to see it for other weapon types, I'll try to do that as well. One more time, thanks for watching. Hope to catch you next time. Bye, guys.